Welcome to another episode of TAU Unbound. I'm Ido Aharoni, your host, and today I have the great pleasure and privilege of hosting Professor Ehud Toledano in our studio.
The pleasure is mine.
And for our listeners and our viewers, Professor Toledano is a professor of Middle Eastern history at Tel Aviv University and the former head of the program in Ottoman and Turkish Studies. But we're not going to talk about Turkey today. We're going to talk about his area of expertise, which is the Middle East in general, and specifically about the October 7th massacre and the ensuing Gaza War. And Professor Toledano, first question to you is, how would you position what's happening in the regional and the global framework?
So first of all, we have to understand that what we have here is a strategic event. So it does have political, it has diplomatic, and military aspects. So in order to envelop them all, we have to deal with each of them. So if we look at what happened, the horrible, horrible disaster, we had to get over it and then get organized in order to respond. And it was very clear to everybody that the response had to be very dramatic and very decisive. And the very clear understanding was, in the political and the military levels, that what we need to end this conflict with Hamas out of power and out of the capacity to attack Israel in any possible way.
So let's talk about that. So you say what should be the end goal is the end of Hamas rule. What are the possible scenarios that you see for Israel to achieve that goal?
First of all, we're now in the military phase, so it's very clear that politically there is no probability to anything but a ground invasion of Gaza. The Israeli public will not accept anything less than that, and you cannot dismantle Hamas, which is what we're talking about, dismantling and taking all their military capabilities off the table and the field. Without ground operation, that would not be possible, despite the very effective air and sea bombardments that we've been witnessing for the past 3 weeks. So basically what we're looking at is the invasion, which does have the support of the international community. For us, the most important are the Americans and the West European countries. The rest, we are used to dealing with whatever they want to dish in our direction, and that's okay. But these are the two important. So these two are very important, and then there is the military, and it will happen one way or another with, let me just say this, that the U.S. is following this very closely and also advising on this. And we had here 3 generals. One of them was the major general in the operations in Fallujah and also in Mosul in Iraq. So he knows a bit about how you fight in a densely populated area like Gaza, which Fallujah was and Mosul the same, and how you define your goals and how you go about achieving them, which is the most important thing. And he was here looking at the situation. They were here, and especially that 3-star general, and they left. And their impression was that there are basically 2 large alternatives. One is to do like what we did in Defensive Shield Operation in the West Bank, which is known as the Chomat Magen, and that is the when we go house to house to clear the refugee camps of the terrorist units, organization, weapons, everything. And the famous picture is how the army goes through one house to the other through breaking the walls and getting in. That's a very intensive, highly costly in terms of our soldiers' casualties and stuff like that, and it takes a long time. These are the two elements that we, I would say, don't have or cannot afford. One is time. There is a very distorted view of how much we have. All the generals in the various studies talk about months, and we have no problem and all that. This is, of course, an illusion. The U.S. and the West, but most importantly the U.S., probably will give us 3 weeks. 4 weeks would be at the maximum to do a massive ground operation. With all the civilian casualties that will happen and the enormous criticism in the world that will follow. We cannot afford, despite what a lot of people say, we cannot afford the high number of soldiers' casualties. It's easy and nice to say that, but when we start getting the bodies and we start getting the funerals and we start listening to the families, this is going to be over. So in that sense, the two criteria that are the most important, reducing casualties as much as possible and actually living within the framework of time limits of about 4 weeks at the most, there is no question in my mind, and apparently also in the American experts' mind, that a operation along the lines that we did in Defensive Shield is out of the question. We can have elements of it. We can't have the whole thing.
So what you're saying is that tactically Israel should deploy the specialty elite units. There is no other way but to invade Gaza with boots on the ground. Question is, how long do you see the IDF staying in Gaza? And I say this assuming that the full reoccupation of the Gaza Strip is off the table.
Okay, so first of all, let me say how I think we can go. I said, first of all, how we shouldn't go, not Defensive Shield. Well, we should go in with tanks very rapidly as much as we can, and we have the engineering capacities to actually clear the mines and clear all the IDs and all of that, and get as quickly as possible to the center of Gaza, where in the underground we have all the leadership of the Hamas and many of their soldiers. So this mostly, much of it is under the Shifa hospital, but really I don't believe, and I think nobody else believes, that Sinwar and Dev, the two leaders of military Hamas, are still there. Probably not. But the other, rank and file at the very top level are there and need to be sort of taken out. So what I'm saying is what we should do is take the model of the Beirut operation that Arik Sharon and under the Begin government did in 1982, which is get as close as you can to the headquarters, try to occupy only a certain part where most of the leadership stays, and then give an ultimatum. You surrender and leave the country like Arafat left for Tunis, or we eliminate you.
Right. By the way, I happened to be in Beirut in 1982, and my unit went into a neighborhood called Corniche El Mazra, and we entered only after a very long period of bombing and artillery and air force, and although we did go house to house, apartment to apartment, we didn't go all the way. We besieged the compounds, and indeed Arafat was forced to leave Beirut. And so in your book, the expulsion of Hamas leadership would be a sufficient outcome
Absolutely.
of the ground operation.
It will be the outcome that's most desirable and most achievable. And I think, if you take out 400 of the leadership out of the country, they can go to Doha, they can go, and then, maybe 2,000 of their soldiers, top soldiers and all of that, going far from our borders. There are Muslim countries.
All right. Let me ask you something that is more strategic.
Yeah, wait a second,
please.
just to say that what has to follow is not just the leadership. Once this happens, they have to disarm and everything. We have to destroy. Well, we're very, very close, and without them around, very close to all the missiles and rockets and all of that. All of them have to be destroyed physically. The rest of the weapons must be collected, but it won't be by us.
Right. And it could be, and that begs another big question. Who would that be? Would that be a trusteeship? Would that be the United Nations, the U.S., the European Union? Who would be that mechanism?
Right. So everybody's talking about the end game. What's going to happen after, the day after? So I have a different view from most people where they think it's our responsibility to manage things out there. I think that we should give a 48-hour ultimatum again and say, now that Hamas is basically out of commission, it cannot govern, you send here an international force, whatever you can gain. It can be NATO, it can be Arab-backed, it can be anything you want. Within 48 hours, you come in. We leave, no matter what happens. Now, well, it's going to be a chaos, yes, let there be chaos. Those will fight, infighting, and that. We can make sure from the air and the sea that no one party, certainly not Hamas remnants or jihad remnants, can take over. So when they begin to have the upper hand, we bomb them. So basically, we can leave this as is. They'll fight each other, kill each other, and lo and behold, the civilian population will suffer. But I don't believe that this will happen. I think that immediately upon our starting to move out, there will be a force very rapidly put together internationally coming in. They will come in and start to the humanitarian assistance that will be huge, because it'll be a disaster out there. In the north, I'm saying in the south. They're already there.
In your scenario, what do you see happening to the hostages?
Well, hopefully we'll be able to get to them. We have to get to them. And once we put the ultimatum on the leadership, they go out, but all our hostages go out. All of them. So there's not a question of whether, we... And when we operate now, you can already see that the army is as much intelligence as they have about the whereabouts of the hostages, and nobody knows everything, because Hamas doesn't know where all the hostages are, and Jihad doesn't know where all the hostages are. There are, groups and militias that hold hostages that, private people grabbed in. So basically, they don't even know. I mean, they answered the Russians when the Russians said, get our citizens out and release them. They said, we don't even know who are your citizens. Give us a list. They gave them a list. So they're looking for them. So basically, even Hamas, especially at this moment, where their management, and control capabilities are severely reduced, severely diminished. So therefore, whatever we know about where they are,
now,
rest assured we don't bomb them.
Based on your experience and you studied the Ottoman Empire, I'd like to take you back to 1972. Golda Meir government, Munich, 11 Israeli athletes are massacred on German soil. Same degree of humiliation, same degree of frustration, although what we experienced on October 7th is the worst event since the Holocaust. But Golda's government makes a decision that every person that was involved in the massacre in Munich will be taken out. And it takes Israel decades to complete the mission. Do you see the same thing happening now?
No. I think it'll be much faster. First of all, we know, and by facial recognition, we have almost all of those who took part, those who survived. I mean, a lot of those who took part in the massacres are dead, were killed here by our soldiers. So those that are back, we know, basically 200 of them are under the Shifa hospital. We know who they are, most of them, not everybody. So we'll go in and kill everybody that we can, and that's not going to take a long time. That's part of what the ground operation should achieve. And even after we leave, and if some of them manage to escape, we'll hunt them, and that shouldn't take decades. So that can be much easier to do than when the PLO people who committed those.
So, from a tactical point of view, in your view, the armored units should lead the way.
Absolutely.
And then, only then, the infantry.
Oh, yeah, the infantry should go hand in hand with them, but within armored vehicles. We also have very well protected armored vehicles. And they all have, sort of a defensive kind of an electronic shield that they use. And there are other things, and from the air, that's going to limit our casualties. It's not going to eliminate. I mean, there will still be, people who would come out and shoot a rocket, and that have to be eliminated, from the ground. And so I'm not saying that this is, but that there's no comparison between going house to house and doing this.
Right.
And therefore, and I'm dead set against going into the tunnels and fighting there. You bomb whatever you need to do once you clear them, and we do have the necessary bombs now that the Americans have refused to give us for Iran, given us for this thing. So that'll be destroyed. The whole underground city that's called.
You mean the bombs
metro.
that are able to destroy the bunkers?
Yes.
To penetrate.
Right.
Deep
Yes,
underground.
Yes.
Now, let me ask you about the Arab and the Muslim world.
Right.
In the spirit of oppressed versus oppressors, Israeli media is communicating to the Israeli public that it's black and white. But we know that it's more complex than that, that many Arabs and many Muslims obviously disagree with what Hamas did and think that, and I've heard the son of Hamas saying that Hamas opened the gates of hell on the Palestinians. I've heard many Palestinian intellectuals who've been very critical of Israel over the years saying this is the end of the Palestinian national plight. What do you hear from the Muslim and the Arab world? How would you describe? Is it more complex than the media is showing us?
Well, there are voices, but there is also a very dominant kind of voice, and it's very clear. It's up to the point where we started bombing Gaza, and the immediate few days of shock from the massacres here, that they didn't say anything. They understood that something huge happened, that Hamas did something horrible, and they reserved judgment. They said many of them condemned it, but some simply were in such huge shock that they stopped. Then, when the pictures came out of Gaza and the babies and everything that Hamas knows how to show, and it's there. I mean, let's face it, it's there. Then it completely turned 180 degrees over, and the condemnation of Israel is overwhelming, and this, what we're doing is genocide and everything else and all that. And the Arab street is extremely agitated and hostile, and it's not surprising in any way. It's the governments who try to control and keep this under a lid, but they themselves are afraid that if they say or do something that is in any way does not help the Palestinian cause there, then they'll be whipped aside. So in that sense, it's a tricky kind of a balance.
Let's talk about Iran. Because I remember, again, maybe it happened during those immediate first days after October 7th, where Iranian audience in a football game was booing a moment of silence for victims of Hamas. So there's a strong anti-Iranian regime within Iran, strong opposition. But let's talk about Iran. What do you see them doing, assuming that Israel will continue with a ground invasion, assuming Israel will end Hamas rule?
So first of all, just to say something about what you said about the booing during the soccer games, that happened even before October 7th. It's just not the regular. There is every time they try to say something in favor of the Palestinians, raise the flag, something like that, they were booed, because this is the sentiment that doesn't have anything to do with Palestine or Israel. It's anti-regime kind of a reaction. We've had enough of you and your involvement everywhere in the Middle East and abroad, and we need to take care of ourselves and invest whatever we have here because the people are suffering. So in that way, there is a strong opposition in Iran, but it's totally incapable, as we saw, of doing anything to move the regime. The regime is oppressive to an nth degree, and it uses all sorts of internal measures, I would say, that not to characterize it beyond that, measures that assure its survival. And demonstrations now can bring it down. Something from within the regime will have to give at a certain point to bring a coup and move, and within the Revolutionary Guard. If it doesn't happen within the Revolutionary Guards, it's not going to happen. So Iran in general, what it would do if Hamas collapses, nothing. Simply because Iran's plan is a regional kind of a program, master program, to be influential and hopefully hegemonic, but they're very far from that. They know that. But they want to push their proxies. And their proxies were Hamas, Jihad Islami in particular, but Hamas also, Hezbollah, and there are militias within Syria that are pro-Iranian militias, Iraqi mostly, that have infiltrated through the border regions through the last year mostly, and Assad allowed that to happen because Assad was a protege of the Russians and the Iranians basically. So in that way, if we look at their entire as like the Houthis in the Yemen, also proxies. So they would operate as much as they can through their proxies, but they would not risk Hezbollah for Hamas. So Hamas goes, then they will try to continue later to build up something, which this is one of the main things that we will learn from this conflict, is that we'll never allow this to happen again, to build a military capacity, no matter how much money Iran pours in, but not weapons. It doesn't. So then why did they build up Hezbollah so much? They did that because that was their weapon to, for the day that the United States and Israel attack their nuclear capabilities and try to take them out. So for that to deter Israel and the U.S. from doing that, they built up Hezbollah with all those enormous arsenal of weapons and everything, and the Radwan force in the southern part of Lebanon facing us now. But they were
now. By the way, what you're saying basically, if I understand you correctly, inevitably, someday in the future, not now, Israel will have proactively take out Hezbollah.
No question about that.
And how would you go about doing that? Let's assume it happens after Hamas is taken out, maybe 3 years down the road.
Yeah, I wouldn't say 3 years. I would give it a few months. I would give it maximum a year once we have managed to organize and set up the plan and all that. Again, I believe in ultimatums and staying and putting your money where your mouth is. Otherwise, it's not going to help. So putting your weaponry behind your mouth, I would give them, with United States backing, an ultimatum. Remove the Radwan forces beyond the Litani River, which is about 20 kilometers from the Israeli borders. There you can be and do whatever you want. You cannot cross. You cross, you get shot.
What about the missiles?
Yes, and that's the most important thing in terms of the ability to hurt the Israeli population back in. That's a capacity that we will have to demand that they dismantle it. Of course, they won't, and then we will have no option but to take it out, and accepting the fact that for 2 days maybe they will still be able to cause enormous damage, which we have to be prepared for. But then we destroy the entire arsenal, which we know where exactly it exists, unlike what we know about Hamas, that we don't know exactly where everything is, and you can see that they can still, until 10 minutes ago, still shoot rockets from places that. For Hezbollah, we know exactly where they are, and we know exactly how to destroy it.
Let me ask you about two more actors in the region, which you're very well, equipped to answer. The first is Turkey, and the other is Saudi Arabia. The question about Turkey is, how does this affect Turkey-Iranian relations? And about Saudi Arabia, is this the end of the talks about normalization, or that the Iranians have the capacity to put it on the back burner and wait a little bit?
So first of all, Turkey. So Turkey, as we expected, after the immediate shock and condemnation of what Hamas did, without calling them a terrorist organization, they've started, condemning us and talking about what we do in Gaza in the loudest and most aggressive way possible. So Erdogan uses language, but that here he had no choice, because the sentiments among the public were very clear behind Gaza. Hamas, which he hosted much of the leadership, Aharoni and others, in Turkey, but had removed them recently and was going to kick them out completely after the attacks of Hamas here. But of course now it's a different story. He might be willing to take those 500 or whoever, top people that we would like to expel from here. He might be willing to take them. So he is, but you asked about how that affects his relationship with Iran. With Iran, they have very competitive kind of a relationship. They're not friends in any way. They cooperate where they can. They check each other. But in Syria, for instance, they were at loggerheads. I mean, the Iranians backed Assad, and the Turks were very much against the Assad regime, and have even invaded in order to what they consider defend themselves from the Kurds up in the north. But then they're still in Syrian territory, and they face the anti-Assad groups that are still powerful in Idlib, at least in parts of the Syrian northwest. So in that way, they know the Iranians very well, and they know how to deal with the Iranians. And there's they're not going to cooperate with Iran in any way. So Iran, and basically Iran, we have to face it, is very limited in its capacity to act against Israel directly, not through the proxies. What can it do? Send a few rockets, missiles. Yeah, that can be there. But they know exactly what they will get in return.
And the U.S. is here.
And the U.S. is here exactly for that purpose, for Hezbollah, but for Iran as well.
And I must say that I was very impressed by the United States military capability to intercept the rockets from the missiles from Yemen.
No, they have the capabilities.
And I, as a Yemenite Israeli, I'm deeply offended that the Yemenites would try to hurt us here.
Like the Palestinians and the Israelis, not all the Yemenites are the same.
Yes, I know. Now, Saudi Arabia.
Yeah. Look, Saudi Arabia was on the way to a normalized relationship with Israel as part of an American strategic alliance to put a stop to Iran's interference in the region, and to create the direct links for economic cooperation and supply Europe and everywhere else. And nothing changed this because of what happened here by Hamas and what we're doing in Gaza. It's just because of internal considerations, because they also have a public that they have to pacify and keep in control, that is outraged by what is going on in Gaza, what they're doing in Gaza. So once this blows over, hopefully, they will not lament the dismantling of Hamas. They would love to see that. They see, as much as Turkey sponsors Hamas as a member in the Muslim Brotherhood, regional network, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Bahrain, and all the Gulf states very much oppose Muslim Brotherhood groups within their countries and in the region. As Qatar is the only one that basically, with Turkey, supports those Muslim Brotherhood groups because the Emir himself is a Muslim brother. So in that way, and was engaged in Dawah propaganda in West Africa and all that, he's very much involved. So Qatar is the only weak link in that thing, but because they're under American boots, basically, literally boots on the ground. It's the largest American base in the region is in Qatar. They will be very limited in what they can do in this aspect.
One last question.
Sure.
Because, I can have this
conversation.
Yeah,
on and on forever.
Yes, because it's fascinating, because you have so much knowledge. And
Thank you.
The framing of this is about America at the end of the day. We're looking at a Russian-sponsored effort to undermine the United States in Ukraine, to undermine NATO, to undermine. So where do you see this struggle between the delusional dreams of Putin and what's happening in the United States? In many ways, I think that Russia is misunderstanding what's happening in the American society internally, just as Hamas misunderstood what was happening in Israel socially and politically internally.
Right. So this is Russia in general. We haven't touched on Russia at all. I think we need to look at it very carefully, much less about what the Russians say and much more about what they do. And we have bombed 5 times already Damascus and Aleppo airports. We're continuously bombing any attempts by the Iranians to move anything to Lebanon, to Hezbollah. We're also checking Golan Heights and beyond Iranian presence and militias and so on. The Russians, who control the airspace completely, do nothing, not even say anything. So it's all done with their backing and consent. Make no mistake about it. So what Russia does in this conflict goes way beyond what your analysis of they're trying to fight a war with the United States through their proxies here. They're totally absorbed in Ukraine. They're bogged down. They have enormous problems. They're fighting the United States there and NATO. They're not going to do it here. They're overexposed. They're overexposed even in Syria. They're way overexposed in Africa and in Asia, especially after Wagner is no longer interwoven into their strategic power. It may come on later, but it's way.
But it lost much. It lost much of its viability.
Much of what it used to do, and it's not trusted. It's not trusted by the Russians.
Professor Toledano, I could talk to you really, as we said before, for hours, but I really want to thank you for
very much.
Providing us with such a comprehensive overview. I mean, you were tactical, you were strategic, you were regional, you were global. It was fascinating.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank you. There's no doubt in my mind that we will ask you to come back. Hopefully when this whole thing will be behind us.
Yeah.
And so thank you again, and to our viewers and listeners all over the world from Tel Aviv, goodbye until our next episode.
Thank you.